In the spring of 1945, the very heart of the Nazi regime, Berlin, was about to become the stage for the final bloody act of World War II in Europe. This wasn't a battle fought on open fields. It was a desperate, brutal fight in the rubble-choked streets, a final violent spasm of a dying empire that would change the world forever.
You really have to picture this. By early 1945, the Nazi war machine that had held Europe in its grip for 6 long years was completely falling apart. From the west, you have the Allies pushing over the Rhine. And from the east, well, from the east, a storm is coming. The Third Reich is trapped, caught in a vice, and it's shrinking down to one last fight for its own capital.
2.5 million. Just try to wrap your head around that number for a second. This wasn't just an army. This was a tidal wave of humanity, hardened by years of the most brutal warfare imaginable, and they were all focused on one single goal: Berlin.
Yep, that was the incredible strength of the Soviet force that was mobilized for this final push. The Red Army, after years of savage fighting on the Eastern Front, was now right at the gates, and they were ready to end the war and, for many, to get their revenge.
And this really brings us to the core question of this whole thing. Hitler had promised a Reich that would stand for 1,000 years. So how on earth did it all come crashing down in a chaotic 16-day bloodbath? How did this self-proclaimed master race meet its end in the ruins of its own city?
To really get how the city fell, we have to rewind just a little bit and see how the noose got so tight in the first place. You see, the fate of Berlin wasn't decided in April of '45. The writing was on the wall months, even years before, thanks to some absolutely catastrophic German defeats.
This timeline here really shows just how fast everything unraveled for Germany. In the summer of '44, the Soviets launched this massive offensive, Operation Bagration, and it just annihilated Army Group Center. It was a blow they never, ever recovered from. At the exact same time, you've got D-Day opening up the Western Front, sealing Germany in a two-front war they could not win. By January '45, the Soviets are liberating Warsaw, they're liberating Auschwitz, and by February they're standing on the Oder River, just 60 kilometers from Berlin. The endgame was on.
Okay, so before the Red Army could actually march into Berlin, they had to smash through one last major defensive line, the Seelow Heights. This was it. This was Germany's last real chance to stop the juggernaut before it hit the city streets.
And when you look at the matchup, it wasn't even close. It was a completely lopsided fight. The Soviets brought 1 million soldiers, 22,000 artillery pieces, an unbelievable amount of firepower. And facing them, 100,000 desperate Germans, many of them just kids, all of them running dangerously low on fuel and ammo. It was brute force versus sheer desperation. Now, the Germans held out for a few incredibly brutal days, but the sheer weight of the Soviet attack was it was unstoppable. The outcome was so obvious that even the master of propaganda himself, Joseph Goebbels, had to admit it in his own private diary. His words say it all. The road to Berlin was now wide open.
With that last line of defense totally shattered, the disconnect between reality and the Nazi high command became absolute. While the Red Army is literally encircling his city, Hitler is deep underground in the Führer bunker, completely detached from reality, moving around phantom armies on a map.
Even in those last days, Hitler was clinging to this one last crazy hope. He truly believed that a brilliant counterattack, this massive pincer movement, could trap the Soviets and somehow miraculously save the city. But was a plan like that even remotely possible?
So here's the grand plan, straight from the bunker. Army Detachment Steiner hits from the north. The 9th and 12th Armies attack from the southeast and west. They'd all slam into the Soviet flanks, trap them, and save the day. It's a classic military maneuver, right? But it relies on one very, very important detail. You actually need to have the armies to do it.
And that was the problem. The stark reality was these armies only existed on Hitler's map. They were gone, destroyed, or just way too weak to do anything. On April 22nd, when Hitler finally found out that Steiner's attack never happened, he had a complete and total nervous breakdown, screaming that his generals were traitors. And for the first time, he admitted to everyone in that bunker that the war was lost.
So with any hope of rescue gone, the battle just devolved into this horrible, grinding, street-by-street fight. The Red Army pushed forward relentlessly, block by block, heading straight for the symbolic heart of the Third Reich.
So who was actually left defending the city? Well, it was a pretty grim, cobbled-together group. You had what was left of the regular army, and the SS fighting alongside untrained boys from the Hitler Youth and old men from the Volkssturm, the People's Storm. Add in some police officers and even a few veterans from World War I, and that was the last defense of the Thousand-Year Reich.
The entire battle for Berlin really reached its climax right here, at the Reichstag building. For the Soviets, this wasn't just about taking another building. Capturing the German parliament was the ultimate symbol of their victory over fascism. The fighting inside was just ferocious, room by room, floor by floor.
Now, you've all seen one of the most famous photos in history that came from this battle. But the story behind it, well, it's pure propaganda. That iconic shot of the Soviet flag being raised over the Reichstag, it was actually staged 2 days after the building fell. The smoke you see was added in a dark room to make it look more dramatic. And maybe most telling, they edited a second watch off one of the soldiers' wrists, a watch that was almost certainly looted. The image was a powerful symbol, but it wasn't a snapshot of reality.
While the Reichstag was falling, the Nazi leadership, trapped in the bunker just below, knew they were out of options. With the Red Army just a few hundred meters away, they prepared for their own end, their own Twilight of the Gods.
On the very same day the assault on the Reichstag began, Adolf Hitler, who had just married his longtime partner Eva Braun hours earlier, ended his life. He shot himself. She bit down on a cyanide capsule. Following his direct orders, their bodies were carried out, drenched in gasoline, and burned, just to make sure he would never be captured, dead or alive.
But perhaps the most chilling, horrifying act of those final hours came the very next day. Joseph Goebbels and his wife Magda, saying they refused to live in a world without National Socialism, poisoned their own 6 young children before taking their own lives. It was the ultimate, nightmarish display of the total moral collapse of the regime's most devoted followers.
With Hitler and Goebbels dead, what little command was left just disintegrated. On the morning of May 2nd, General Helmuth Weidling, the last commander of Berlin's defenses, walked across the Soviet lines and unconditionally surrendered the city. The battle for Berlin was over.
But the cost? My God, the cost was just astronomical. In just 16 days of fighting, both sides had about 350,000 casualties. That's killed and wounded. And on top of that, the Soviets took nearly 500,000 German prisoners. It was one of the single bloodiest battles of the entire war.
And for the civilians who managed to survive, the end of the shooting didn't mean the end of the horror. Berlin was a sea of rubble. And in the immediate aftermath, the people faced a brutal wave of retribution from some soldiers who were seeking revenge for what had been done to their own country. The suffering of Berlin was far from over.
The fall of Berlin was the definitive, absolute end of the Third Reich. But as the smoke cleared from the ruins, it revealed a brand new world order. 2 superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, were now staring each other down across a divided continent. Right there, in the ashes of Hitler's capital, a city that would soon be split in 2 itself, the battle lines were already being drawn. One war had finally ended, but a new, colder one had already begun.